Rowan Dean, host of Outsiders, it's a Tuesday after all, joins me right now. We always time the Brexit stuff for you. You must have a hotline into Nigel Farages. I have to take a bit of exception to that media commentator there in Britain saying that this is a U-turn. Yeah. This is bloody smart strategy, in my view.
Absolutely. That was a misreading of what has actually been taking place. As you know, I've been saying for months that Brexit will finally be delivered with Nigel Farage either in Downing Street or pretty close to Downing Street as some kind of advisor or in some kind of coalition with the Tories or whatever. This strategy has just kept on going down that road. So Nigel Farage has one interest. That's delivering Brexit. He's made it clear he's not interested in being Prime Minister. He doesn't want to play politics. He's a rare politician, and that he doesn't actually want to be in Parliament. He just wants to deliver Brexit. So his entire focus, and the British people recognise this, is laser-like on delivering Brexit. So there's been this problem, this game of chicken between the Tories, who have a kind of Brexit light that they're keen to sell as the real deal, and Farage saying, well, it's not really quite good enough. They've been playing this game of chicken as they head towards November 14th, which is when all the candidates have to be declared. What we're seeing now is basically a compact, a non-aggression pact, which is what Nigel Farage has been talking about all along. Now, whether they've done a deal behind doors, whether it's been a phone call, whether Nigel Farage has simply thought to himself, well, I won't contest any of the Conservative seats to guarantee the Conservatives get that majority. But the reality is, Peter, there are many, many seats across the north of Britain whose parents were the Arthur Scargill miners who blame Thatcher for having lost their jobs and their careers and so on, who will just simply never vote Tory. They love the idea of Brexit, but they can't bring themselves to vote Tory. So Nigel Farage is concentrating on those people to ensure that they don't vote Labour. Now, we're pretty much guaranteed now that we won't get Corbyn.
And a couple of things there. We've got to understand too, the Brexit Party is relatively new. And to run a campaign, a hard-fought campaign in those northern seats against Labor candidates in Labor heartland, let's be very clear, some of those coal seats, it takes resources and it takes strategy and campaigning on the ground. Now, it is smart, if they want to win some of those seats or take the fight right there to Labor, it's first past the post in Britain, that they reorientate the campaign. But it's also really canning politics, this whole switch today. It's not a U-turn. It's smart in the sense Farage had to push the Tory party to the brink because there were so many Tories who were Remainers, right?
That's
right.
They
were Remainers.
Exactly.
But most politicians here and overseas, when they are looking at their own political death, will swallow anything to survive. And they had to see that at the election, in their seats, they were oncers, or they were gone, or they were never going to rise to the great heights that they'd all predicted they would rise. So he has brought them to their knees. They've accepted their own mortality, their political mortality. Now he's prepared to get the deal over the line. Smart politics.
And it's quite interesting. There are vague parallels from what you were saying between how the Turnbullites were all flushed out of the Liberal Party. They've all gone. They've all evaporated. Similar thing happened with Boris Johnson. He actually booted a bunch of the Remainers out of the Tory party, but they've kind of gone and they're less potent as a force. I still suspect we will see after the election, yes, Boris will win, possibly no greater majority than he has now, or even into minority, and he will then do a formal deal with those Brexit whatever is there of the Brexit party. It should be sufficient to give
to get a majority. I think he'll get the 9 seats. I think the yet another candidate over the weekend for Jeremy Corbyn fell by the wayside. Again, claims of anti-Semitism.
Yes.
That's 150 MPs and candidates on the Labor side of politics now tied up in anti-Semitism. So this isn't a couple of outliers. This is a systemic anti-Semitism at the heart now of the British Labor Party. And it is terrifying when you think of what Britain did in the Second World War only 70-odd years ago to be back in this situation.
Well, in this week's Spectator, Tanya Gold, who is a British Jewish woman of the left, very much of the left all her career, all her life, has come out saying basically she no longer sees Britain as a country for her. This is a familiar refrain. We've heard it from Melanie Phillips, we've heard it from other people, other Jewish people who have said they cannot see a future for themselves in Britain. And I think it's something like 47% of British Jews have said if Jeremy Corbyn gets into Downing Street, they're gone. They're out of there.
And we saw this in France too.
Yes.
We've seen it in Russia. There's been recent waves of immigration coming out of Europe. It's pretty horrific to see.
And let's be really clear where this anti-Semitism is coming from. It's coming from the hard left, the Greens, the Labor Party.
Well, Michael Danby wrote about this
Absolutely.
too. A former member for Melbourne Ports, was a Labor MP, retired at the last election. He wrote very powerfully about this in the Australian newspaper last week. He said, Corbyn is, you know, sort of no daffy loser. He is sinister. On this point,
Absolutely.
He is sinister, and I think that's
And
true.
this goes to this link between this this idea of Islamophobia. So any criticism of Islam is to the left's mind terrible and evil. And so you've got this link between extreme Islamic ideals, hard left ideals, hard green ideals. They've all come together in this kind of toxic brew, which is poisonous for Jews because they see Israel as some kind of oppressor, and therefore they have focused their anti-Semitism on not only Israel but on the Jews living in Europe. And it's the same old anti-Semitic tropes that we've seen going back to medieval times.
Yes.
And this keeps coming up, and the left, the hard left in Britain and in America, and I hope not in this country, but in Britain and America, the left, not even the hard left, have bought into this virulent anti-Semitism, and it's sickening and disgusting.
Yeah, we'll keep on watching it too, because the Labor hard left and left in Australia is in the ascendancy inside the broader Australian Labor movement, and that's the worry that the Labor Party has. I think the Greens are gone for money, but I don't see them as a viable party of government. However, the price paid for their block of votes and their preferences and deals done to enable Labor to take office is what should concern us all. I want to stay with the Greens. I want to put up some material just now. Quotes from a number of Green senators. We know Richard Di Natale's had quite a bit to say in relation to these fires, and he claims links to climate change. Every politician, lobbyist, pundit and journalist who has fought to block serious action on climate change bears responsibility, he says, for the increasing risk from a heating planet that is producing these deadly fires. But his WA Senator, the young and wet behind the ears, I have to say, Jordan Steele, went further and had this to say.
How dare you suggest that our country is beyond the ability of rising to a similar challenge? How dare any of you suggest that in this moment, at this time, it is appropriate to be prosecuting a piece of legislation with the aim of propping up coal? You are no better than a bunch of arsonists. Borderline arsonists.
All right, so I think he thought and realised he went way, way too far with the arsonist, brought it back to borderline arsonist, but the point is there.
Yeah, these people are buffoons, basically. They're as silly and as unintellectual as the medieval people who thought that if they slit the throat of the goat, the volcano wouldn't explode. It's complete nonsense. They cannot point to any data that backs up either links to between bushfires and so-called climate change. It's all nonsense. The reality is, and this is what is seriously, he can talk about arson. The reality is that we have seen Australia is a tinderbox, and it is a tinderbox because for the last decade or 2 decades, the environmentalist cult or environmentalist religion and its sister, the climate change cult, have stopped people clearing out land. The Paris Agreement and Kyoto tie Australia in to having excessive bush that you can't even clear. Drones fly over farms to make sure people aren't feeding their mulga to their own cattle. This is how bonkers and insane we have gone. Paris ties us into having these vast areas of just growing stuff. And what do we find from the bushfire fighters? They're saying, we've gone into these places, say up near Byron Bay, thick with lantana. Now, lantana, apart from being a great film, also happens to be an imported weed brought in from Europe.
I know, but it gets accounted for in the climate change statistics about being a carbon sink.
Precisely.
This is the rubbish.
The Paris Agreement causes,
Correct.
climate change causes the fuel for the bushfires. You need someone to light the thing. We need stronger laws to prosecute arsonists. You need a fuel load to burn the stuff, and we are deliberately cultivating that fuel load. Peter, a friend of mine, sent me an article from an ACT website during the winter, which was telling people you cannot go and collect firewood. They even called it firewood from out in the bush because little furry animals like to live in the dead wood. This is what our councils, our national parks, our other authorities, all infused with this environmental religion, are preventing us from preventing the bushfires. And that is the reality that is out there today.
I put up a tweet a little earlier on from Rowan Dean, and he gets it absolutely right. For 60,000 years, he says his people have been involved in dealing with issues of land management, mitigation using fires, managing bushfires with fire. And he says, you know, when a so-called technically advanced people going to listen to how they did it in the past.
And he's absolutely right. And anybody who's ever built a bonfire, for example, knows that if you've got the heavy, big trees and the tiny little twigs, you're not going to get anything. You need that stuff in the middle, which is all this dead fuel, which is dead brush, dead bushes, dead scrub. That is the fuel which makes these things so toxic. The Aborigines knew you burn that stuff off, you keep that clear, and your fire's never going to take off to the extent that we're seeing now. Yeah.